So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. This is an informational session about anti-racism programming in the coming year for St. Margaret's. And tonight is intended as an informal conversation to help, in large part, Diana and me think through what makes the most sense for St. Margaret's at this time. So your input is what this meeting is all about, is your input and getting your read on where you personally are, where you think the parish is, what would work best for us in the coming weeks and months and throughout the rest of the year. And maybe even beyond that, we'll see. But I have three goals for tonight's conversation. One is to introduce you all to a specific curriculum called Sacred Ground, to get your input on that, to see whether you think that would be the good place to begin. And regardless if it is, the second objective of tonight is to get your other thoughts and recommendations of things that you know of, that you think in addition or instead of Sacred Ground we might consider doing at St. Margaret's. Or maybe your impression after hearing about Sacred Ground would be that that's a good goal, but maybe let's not start there. Let's start with something smaller or a smaller time commitment and then build up to Sacred Ground. Or you may have another recommendation outside of what's been discussed. And third, hopefully Farah will arrive at some point. If not, I can speak to it. Third, I want to introduce the concept of a history project for the parish. To examine specifically the history of St. Margaret's and its legacy of race and racism as a parish. So that's the plan for tonight. And we are recording this for St. Margaret's YouTube channel, but it will be a private unlisted recording just for parishioners to be able to catch up. So do encourage you to unmute and ask your questions and offer your comments so that it can be a true conversation as we go through. To begin, I just want to explain why we're here and why anti-racism programming and why now. I've been a priest at St. Margaret's for going on 3 years now, and rector since this past summer, of course. And in my time, there's really only been one instance, which was last year. We had a special Absalom Jones service, and Gail Fisher-Stewart, the interim rector of St. Luke's, came and gave a forum after church that day. And aside from that, in my 3 years at St. Margaret's, we've not had any other explicit anti-racism programming. I know we've been engaged in the diocese, we've shown up to rallies and protests, and Charlie's Place, which serves predominantly Black and Brown communities, in a way is a living representation of St. Margaret's work toward anti-racism. And yet it bothers me that in 3 years we haven't engaged explicitly in our ongoing learning. My point of view, as someone who's been socialized as white in the United States, is that our learning never ends. That the work of anti-racism is lifelong, especially for those of us socialized as white, that we never learn enough, and that our role in creating an anti-racist country and society requires continued, ongoing, daily, weekly, yearly work. And so from my standpoint, I want to just acknowledge that I know St. Margaret's has done things prior to my association with the parish. That's fantastic, that's great. But we also have a lot of new people at St. Margaret's who have come in just the past 3-5 years. Some of you even newer than that. And we all need to be learning together. The program Sacred Ground that we're going to look at tonight specifically has been recommended by our presiding bishop and by our diocesan bishop. The Episcopal Church has been increasingly explicitly committed to the work of anti-racism, to the point that they modified our annual parochial report that we have to send to the diocese, that's then sent to the denomination, where they now ask questions regarding how your parish is engaged in anti-racism work. So it's now a marker for parish health and vitality. And so the bishop has asked that each parish consider doing this program, Sacred Ground, specifically. It has been done by a number of parishes already in the diocese, and I know that their goal is that all parishes eventually would do it. And lastly, I think the events of all of last year, the murder of George Floyd and the resulting protests that took place right in our backyard at now Black Lives Matter Plaza, really set a moral requirement for us to be responding to the moment as a parish, and to acknowledge that the work of anti-racism is not a one and done thing. So from my perspective, that's why we're here tonight. It also seems to me that acknowledging Ron and the Adult Formation Committee, that where we did discuss this, that this work kind of transcends our church year and doesn't fit neatly into a package of a series that we would offer, like we are for now, for a Lenten series on anti-racism, or an Eastertide series, or so forth. So I see this as fitting in outside of the regular rhythm of adult formation Sunday school type things that we typically offer. So it wouldn't be an instead of, but in addition to. Does that make sense? So I just want to pause for any questions at the outset before we keep going.
Richard, just want to confirm that this would be an ongoing program that we would be thinking about. Just in terms of planning, we should be thinking about this not so much as a one-time thing, but as something over multiple weeks.
Yeah, both and. So the Sacred Ground curriculum, which you'll hear more about when we turn there in just a moment, is a multiple week, perhaps even multiple month program that would take place, but there's a beginning and an end to it. And then we might also explore options for a one-off event that would precede perhaps us doing Sacred Ground. At first, when you asked, I thought you meant ongoing, as in like, we're not just going to do one program and then nothing else. But I guess the question of ongoing in terms of beyond this year would be, we need to be in a constant season of discernment about where is St. Margaret's being called next, perhaps. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Great. Well, I want to play a quick video. It's kind of a little trailer for Sacred Ground to introduce you to it. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out how to make the video full screen. But you'll be able to hear and see it. It'll just be kind of small. See, it's embedded here. So, right, I don't see any full screen expander button. It doesn't look like a YouTube embed. It looks like something else. Let me make sure my sound is on. Share sound. Here we go.
Sacred Ground is a video dialogue series on race and faith. Through the stories of our culture, the stories of our sojourn here in America, the stories of race, both the joys and the sorrows, by listening to those stories and hearing them, and then telling our own stories together, and then looking possibly at the stories of our very faith. Somehow from the travail and the reality of all of those stories may emerge hope for a new day. I'm reminded that in the 3rd chapter of Exodus in the Hebrew scriptures, when Moses climbed up Mount Sinai, and he was trying to discern whether he should go back to Egypt to help to free the Hebrew slaves, he climbed up on the mountain and saw a burning bush. And in the vision of this burning bush, he heard the voice speak to him, Moses, Moses, take off the shoes from your feet, for the ground on which you are standing is holy ground, sacred ground. And then the voice from the bush said, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A friend of mine many years ago preached on that text. And he said the reason that Moses was summoned to take off the shoes from his feet, because the ground on which he was standing was holy ground. Not because the dirt was holy, but because God was about to tell his story. And whenever someone tells their story, you are standing on holy ground. Sacred ground is a time, an opportunity to hear the story of our past with regard to race, to hear our stories of our past, and then to write a new story for a new future where there's plenty good room for all of God's children. God love you. God bless you. And may God hold us all in those almighty hands of love.
That's just a lovely introduction. Let's talk more practicalities. Diana Gustafson has experience directly with the curriculum. I was trained as a facilitator when it was being launched, but then I never went through it myself. So Diana has, and she's going to give us her impression and some of the logistics involved. Unmute, my friend.
I was trained as a facilitator with a bunch of other people over at Church House. And then we actually never really got to go full blown. But at about the same time, I was leading a small group using all the same text and using the same videos at All Souls. So I have led a group in the Sacred Ground curriculum, and it's just incredibly powerful. And we had some very deep, wonderful conversations. And so to give you just some basic information, Sacred Ground takes place over a period of 10 units. It can be, we did it over 10 months. We met once a month. Some groups, some churches are meeting every other week. Some are very intense, they're meeting every week. It depends how much time one has, how much time you have to do reading, how much emotional time you have. But nonetheless, it meets for 10 sessions. The members of the group engage with films, written materials, and conversations about race. It is about story sharing. It's about sharing the stories of our country's stories of race. It's also about sharing our personal stories. What are our personal stories with race? Some of which we don't actually come to understand until we're in this group. So as we are reading the materials, we may say, oh, I had this experience when I was a child, or this was something that my parents or my school teacher said to me. I now understand that this is a story about race. So for that reason, this becomes a sacred circle where we come to learn and trust and be in partnership with each other. And so it becomes a group in which we listen and share and talk to each other. The topics that we talk about each week or month or however it's divided up are two core books. One is Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. You may know of him. He was the spiritual advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. King is said to have carried this book around with him wherever he went. Very powerful book. Another more modern book is by a white woman called Debbie Irving. Grew up in an upper middle class-ish home in the 60s, I think, in New England. And one day realized she was white. She had the privilege of not having to think about the fact she was white. Those are our core readings. And then month to month or week to week, we take on different topics. The first month is Roots of Whiteness. How do we come in this country to understand whiteness? Then we look at ourselves through the eyes of our Indigenous history, Native Americans. Then we look at our Black history, the transatlantic slave trade. Then we look at Latino history. Then we look at Asian Pacific American history. Then we come to what they call the selective access to the melting pot. So who really gets to call themselves an American? And then finally we come up to sort of modern day and what it means to be white in America. And then we talk about the final session is on beloved community and how we can take all of this. So each session, we have read a couple articles, we've watched a couple of videos, we come together, we talk about them, but we try not to be too intellectual. As a facilitator, I kind of like do time out on, there's only a certain amount of time we talk about what happened in the articles, and then the rest of the time is devoted to, well, okay, what did this bring up for you emotionally? Where did you see this in your life? Where have you, if you are a person of color, where have you experienced this? If you're a white person, where have you experienced this? And then a lot of the practice is listening to each other. So that, in a nutshell, is sacred ground. A lot of it's learning to listen to each other. A lot of it's learning to understand, to be vulnerable to what it means to be a country that is racist and what it means to be a member of a country that is racist. And then how do we identify and talk about ourselves within that context? And how do we accept ourselves? A lot of it is about self-acceptance of ourselves and of each other within that context. So I found it powerful to be involved with. And I've been humbled to watch people take part in it. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Questions?
That's what I was just going to say. I know Diana has to leave us right around 7, so let's take advantage of her. Ron.
Thanks. I was, excuse me, I was wondering who produced the program? Was it produced within the Episcopal Church, or was it something that was independent?
Katrina Brown, who also has a terrific film called Traces of the Trade, discovered about 15, 20 years ago at this point that her family was the largest, was the family that was responsible for the most transatlantic slave trade. And so as a result of discovering this, she did a lot of research into her family history and went to Africa, went down to Barbados, and then developed this program. She is a born Episcopalian. She took the program to the Episcopal Church, and so it became integrated into the Episcopal Church.
Thank you.
And you saw her face on the website when next to the presiding bishop. Karen.
Does the curriculum bring in a Christian tradition or an Episcopal tradition?
It will, thank you. There is an exploration of what the role of the Episcopal Church has been in slavery and in racism. So in that sense, yes. And also in the sense that at the beginning of each session, we say a prayer. We light a candle, we say a prayer, we close in prayer. I ask someone, or we assign someone to bring in a prayer each time. We create a covenant together in which we decide how it is that we want to run our group as a covenantal group. We can make it as religious, as spiritual, as Episcopal as we want.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions for Diana about the curriculum? So I'll ask one of the whole group. Diana mentioned that different churches have done it with different rhythms of meeting. And I guess there are options that the facilitators would have in terms of the amount of homework, but it can be considerable in terms of watching feature-length films between the times that you meet, in addition to some readings, which I think is why many churches have only met every month. But it also feels like that's a really long time to go without connecting with your group. So it's hard to imagine like where's the sweet spot in terms of frequency. And it also, as I mentioned earlier, how it's not really connected to regular adult Sunday school. Diana and I don't really see this as fitting really on a Sunday, probably. It's probably more like a Saturday meeting or a weeknight, but preferably Saturday because we're all so tired on weeknights, I find. So we want to be fresh and committed. So if you don't have any other questions about the program itself, I have questions to all of you in terms of your feedback on how is this sounding? Does this appeal to you? Would you want to do it? Is it exciting? What are your thoughts on the format and how frequently we might meet?
I have a question, Richard. Is this an exploration of the past so that we understand it, or are there some practical current day applications?
Diana, can you answer that?
Absolutely. One of the goals, the pedagogical goals, if you will, is to be able to do a couple things. One is to be able to understand current events within the historical context. The other is to be able to understand who you are within the historical context of the country. So in that sense, there are practical applications. A third practical application, and I've gotten this a lot from people who say, well, I really just feel like I should be out there doing something now. And I feel very strongly that before we go out and do something now, or at least hand in hand with doing something now, it's very important that we understand who we are and that we look seriously and honestly at who we are. And that we do that with a sense of trust for each other, that we be able to hold each other up in looking at who we are. I think that's going to be particularly important, and Richard will come to this as we look at what our history is at St. Margaret's, having that experience of being able to hold each other and look at ourselves together.
I have one follow-up. Would this be open to folks outside of the St. Margaret's community, and would it be open to people outside of the Episcopal Church?
I can offer my reaction, which would be that if someone's ready to make that commitment and is at least curious about the St. Margaret's community, that I don't think we would need to make it exclusively for members of St. Margaret's, but yeah, I mean, because I think if someone's going to come in and we're going to have a covenant built with whichever group, we might have more than one group doing it at the same time. And so if they're ready to covenant with us as a community, then I would think it would be okay for, yeah, because it might be a good tool to bring in new people to St. Margaret's by the fact that we're doing this. maybe that's why you ask.
Before we get off, I just want to say, if you decide to talk about other things, I've been talking to Enid Grasse, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, about other things we could do in preparation or instead of, or as we're waiting. And she and I were both very excited about the possibility of doing a sort of a film watch. And one film we both think would be important to watch would be 13th. And there are a lot of guides for watching 13th together. And another one would be Katrina Brown's Traces of the Trade. And that's the history of how she discovered her family were slave traders. So just want to throw that out. I think we should do Sacred Ground. I'm obviously partial to it, but I got to get off now, but as you all are talking about other things, that's too, I just want to throw out, sort of film watching with guidance is something to consider.
Thanks, Diana. We'll follow up.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Have a good class. So I'll continue to try to answer any questions you have. Like I said, I was trained as a facilitator and then it never happened. But it's been a good year and a half since I studied the materials, at least the curriculum itself. But what about the practicalities? Or people have thoughts on I'd just love to know your reactions. Is this sounding good? Are you interested in this? What's your thoughts on the timing of it? Karen, did you?
My first reaction on timing was that every other week sounds like a good logistical approach. It sounds like every week might be a bit much with the amount of homework that you're talking about. I agree that every month, is a long time in between meetings, and especially if you miss a session by 2 months, you could feel pretty disconnected from the process. I'm interested in this because this fall I took part in an anti-racism course that was led by a nonprofit organization in Arlington called OAR, which is Offender Aid and Restoration. And they've really taken a lead on anti-racism issues because of the fact that so many Black and brown people are incarcerated. But it was not, the discussion was not from a faith lens. There was no, there's nothing about religious tradition in it. And I found that in the discussions, I was really missing being able to talk with others from the perspective of my faith. So that's why I'm interested.
Thanks, Karen. Go ahead, Ron.
I guess to try to respond to your question about, what I call periodicity, I guess I would have a question as to whether the goal is to bring in the largest amount of people within St. Margaret's as we could, plus others, as Maya mentioned, if others are willing to join the covenant, or are we looking at the people that would be most intensely engaged and interested? I'm not implying that others would be uninterested, but having organized formation programs now for a bit, you really have to think about what the goal is. Is it maximum participation and sensitization, or is it to kind of dive deeply with a core group who want to really affirmatively learn more about the issue and how to deal with it in the present day?
That's a really good question, and I kind of want time to reflect on the answer, because I think I can see the merits of different answers to that question. I guess as the priest, I always want the most people participating in all the things as possible. But if that means that there's less of a deeper engagement, then I wonder if that's really the right objective. But really, I think the fact that we didn't unilaterally to move ahead with doing this and that we decided to slow down and have such a meeting as this first to take pulse. Feels like that's the path we've intentionally taken to get input from stakeholders, and you all have shown up, which means that you're stakeholders. And whoever else, because of conflicts, couldn't be here tonight, but are interested, then maybe, that's the point of view that's most important right now. And it's not that we'll never do it again. Like with a number of programs that have just been done in my tenure alone, it feels like some become perennial programs that are routinely offered either once a year or once every couple of years, so that if you didn't get it the first time around, you have another opportunity the next. That's a good question.
I guess just a fast follow-up would be, my personal perspective is that it would be better to sort of reach as far out as we could within our parish, because a lot of this is about education, really, or re-education, I should say. And so if that were the case, then I would be tempted to precede it by a special event of some sort, or a guest speaker, or someone who could whet the appetite, the interest of the broader cross-section of the parish. I'm guessing a lot of people would be interested anyway, but it might be good to kind of have a kickoff thing that, spark people's thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the ideas that we've been tossing around. Maggie.
Kind of following Ron's thoughts there, I guess the questions that come up for me logistically, one is like, what's the size of the group that's optimal, like from a pedagogy perspective? So how many, if we following Ron's thoughts, if it's going to be a larger part of the community participating, how many groups does that mean? How many facilitators does that mean? And then also, is there like a train the trainer component? Like, is it possible that those of us that go through this, that some of us might get like an opportunity to then become trained to help lead these groups in the future, and like you said, make it a iterative experience?
Also really great questions in terms of size of the groups, and I wish Diana were still here to speak from her experience at All Souls, but just speaking from my experience with curricula in general and leading small groups, sometimes the smaller the better. I know the guidance for our current program that just kicked off for Lent for Discover was 6 to 8 people per group, probably counting the facilitator. And on average, we tend to have around 30 people who have been participating in a class at a time at St. Margaret's over the past year. I think participation is up because of the pandemic. So if there is 20 to 30 participants in a sacred ground, that calls for at least 3 or 4 smaller groups, which raises a really important question. Diana and I are equipped to facilitate, but we have not yet equipped any other lay leaders to co-facilitate. So that does raise the question of train to trainer and what's required and whether we have the capacity to do that right now. So I'm glad you all are asking these very, very good questions that raise not roadblocks, but just some homework to do before we proceed.
Yeah, I just want to second what Ron and Maggie have said. And we did a similar thing for the Seeking Shalom class. I mean, we had like a 1 day, 2.5 hour thing before we did the series, right? And I thought that worked very well because, to Maya's point, like I would love to engage people that are not currently part of our community in this. And I think it's easier to allow those people to see if the content in the community is right for them in a like single Sunday thing ahead of a course.
Thank you. I'm just taking notes, y'all. That's why I keep looking down. Others?
I just want to say I really want to be a participant in it. And I was this is more and more affirmation about why I want to be a part of St. Margaret's. And however the group decides, whatever pace. I'm very happy that you're looking at this, and that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Maggie. We're glad you're here too. Well, you've given me great input, just an informal show of hands. With that, figuring out the kickoff event idea, figuring out the group sizes, figuring out the frequency. I agree with Karen, no more than every 2 weeks, maybe even every 3 weeks. Maybe different groups organize in different frequencies too, if we get super organized in that way. But show of hands of interest in this and proceeding, like really would like us to get organized and keep going with this. Okay, great. That's just the vote of confidence that I needed to know that yes, we should continue working toward this. We do have about 20 minutes left, so I want to shift gears unless anyone has any other questions on sacred ground. Great, so perfect segue into the idea of a kickoff event that could precede Sacred Ground, perhaps drum up more interest in it. Diana, on her way out, mentioned the idea of a film screening, which we actually are doing on Saturday. 13th was one of the options that we considered, but for various reasons decided to go with I Am Not Your Negro. We thought maybe between the two, fewer people had seen I Am Not Your Negro, but they're both excellent. What we're not necessarily doing on Saturday is a kind of organized pedagogical discussion of the film. So I guess it is more informal and more, parish community oriented than it is learning oriented, though I'm sure we'll learn by watching the film. There are a myriad number of books. All of you come with your own experience and your own work and your lived experience of being Black, for those of you who are. So what besides Sacred Ground, either in the category of a kickoff to Sacred Ground or another option entirely, any other ideas that people would throw out there? And after this part of the conversation, we're then going to turn to the St. Margaret's History Project.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the history event that you mentioned? I know you mentioned that it was something that maybe Farah was going to be helping with, but I wonder if, I think there will be general interest anyway, but I also wonder if it could be appropriate for us to examine kind of our own personal past before diving into the history of our nation and other things. But I think that will truly get at the core for a lot of people, especially who may not realize the complacency of the church as it happened with the slave trade, especially St. Margaret's, and everything that we didn't do historically. So I'm wondering if that could be a good place to start to center it and make it relevant for the parish.
Yes, I was going to go there last.
Sorry.
But yeah, but it may inform your responses to the question at hand. But there's not basically, we'll talk more about it in just a moment, but the history project hasn't begun. Farah has just agreed to chair the effort. We see it as a year-long effort. So there's no information to convey yet about our history. It's the work now begins. It's raise your hand if you want to be a part of it. But it's a working group that needs to be established and begin its work. But there's not yet anything shareable by way of the entire congregation in the format of an event or program.
The young adult group did do a book club with Dear Church that was semi-successful, I think, and people enjoyed that. Commitment was sort of there. So I think that that went well, and something similar could be of interest to the larger group.
I also wonder if maybe just bringing in a speaker, the hearing that we could be starting a history project has made me think, well, who are some people in the community who have been familiar perhaps with DC's racial history, who could come in and speak about this? Especially, I know for me, the DC that I know is very post-gentrification. So if anyone is available to talk more about Chocolate City, that would be something I think that could be interesting.
Thanks for that idea. Great one.
Garrison's comment makes me recall, and this is preceding your time at St. Margaret's, Richard, but when I was in EFM, one year we read together The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. But I mean, we were already in an EFM class, so it was kind of, there was a structure to fill there and it was a great experience, and it was a mixed race class, and so I learned a lot just from reading that book, and she writes beautifully too. But it's a big undertaking to take a huge book like that and kind of go through it. It's almost as long as doing Sacred Ground, I would guess.
And she just published last year her new book called Cast, which I know Glenna at Church of the Epiphany really wanted to use at some point and partner with St. Margaret's in doing a book study of that newer book. But I agree that the scope of such a commitment is about the same with Sacred Ground.
Those books are great. I just wanted to also say that I don't know if it's a real, I studied theology. I'm not sure that these things would be that interesting to people, but womanism, Black women and their response to Black liberation theology, and Sisters in the Wilderness is a book that comes to mind by Dolores Williams. And, you know, maybe looking at the story of Hagar and understanding how Black women push back against Dr. Cohn, who I got to study with, might be interesting to somebody. Speaking for myself, I'm new to DC and I never thought I would like it here, and seeing the predominantly historically Black communities here has changed my whole lens. So anything that teaches me about the history of DC and what may, you know, where am I? It's like super helpful, and a lot of it I'm really excited about. I'm liking it a lot better, more than I thought. And the history, the clear Black communities here are a big part of why I like it. So I'm trying to understand where I am. So thank you for that suggestion, Maya.
I wonder, sort of based on what a couple of different people said, if it wouldn't, another possibility would be to have see if we can engage someone to come speak at the kickoff, as part of the kickoff, that is someone who has written not about St. Margaret's history with race, because nobody's done that, but about specifically the Black history in DC, the history of the African American community, because, like, yeah, the Warmth of Other Suns, like, that's very large, and it might be interesting if we could have somebody who speaks, who's a scholar of that, because I think, Annika, you're right, like the notion of like bringing it to history and that story is something that like gives like a bit of an anchor for some people to come and see. And even if we can't do St. Margaret's, maybe we can do, you know, DC itself. Or if anybody has done scholarship on Adams Morgan, because that's such a close tie to St. Margaret's historically.
Thanks, Farah. I remember seeing like a hand-waving icon, Giselle, earlier, but that was a while ago. Were you trying to speak? No? Okay. It must have been an affirmative wave thing. Cool. So I have the kickoff event idea generally, the questions about the Sacred Ground. I saw, Ron, your note about the cathedral. Thank you for that. Chocolate City guest speaker. I love the womanist idea at some point. I could see that fitting more neatly into like a seasonal class for St. Margaret. So I'm filing that idea away. But yeah, DC speaker or scholar specifically from one of the local schools. Loving all these ideas, really, really helpful. Any others before we talk about St. Margaret stuff? Cool. So this is moving right along. Did Pharaoh's box just disappear? No, there you are. People keep moving on me. The Hollywood Squares. Yes, as of, you know, however many hours ago it was that Farah and I spoke today, she has agreed to my request of chairing this effort to examine St. Margaret's history with race and racism. Because if we're going to embark on this journey of becoming a more anti-racist parish, then we really need to begin by looking inward and at our own history, which only makes us all the more capable of going outside of our parish and standing in solidarity and acting for a more anti-racist city and country. The diocese hosted an event on the Friday preceding diocesan convention, which would have been the last Friday in January, about reparations. And the guest speaker was Bishop Eugene Sutton from the Diocese of Maryland. They were the first diocese in the Episcopal Church to allocate reparations fund for the diocese past complicity in the chattel slavery movement. Is that the right phrase? And the Diocese of Washington has just formed, well, not just, a year ago formed a reparations task force, if that's the right phrase. And they sponsored this event at the end of January. And as part of that event, they published this document that I included in my blog a week ago, I think, which is a kind of guiding document for a parish to examine its own history through a research project, to really look at the historic connections to when your church was founded, the benefactors of your church, the history of your neighborhood, and all that may have been at play in terms of the either implicit or explicit race and racism that was at play. So Farah has agreed to help champion this work. And maybe you could say a few words about that, Farah, and make a call for those who might be interested in being part of it.
Yes, absolutely. So I was super intrigued when Richard asked me about this, partially because I've messed around a little bit in the parish records, but only a little bit, and uncovered some interesting stuff that is within living memory but has sort of been lost, and that is not within living memory but has been remembered and misremembered. So it was very interesting to me to be asked by Richard and to look at the diocese's helpful, I don't know if they're guidelines. Maybe I'll call them guidelines, because I'm lazy and don't feel like thinking of another word. The idea that to do good history, we must know solid facts, and that part of that is understanding, based on data, what we actually come from and what has happened over our past. And even reading this, it talks about, if you're a really, really old church, all your diocesan records are from when we were part of Maryland, the Diocese of Maryland. And I was like, oh, thank God. We don't have to deal with that. We aren't like 200 years old, because that's just more work. But this provides us a really interesting, meaty amount of stuff to look at. And I come to this project having just finished up being on the research committee at the City of Alexandria's Community Remembrance Project. You guys are many of you are probably familiar with the Equal Justice Initiative. And part of the Equal Justice Initiative's lynching memorials and museums work is the Community Remembrance Project, in which communities across the nation that have documented lynchings in their history work out. The city government, in this case, Alexandria City Government, sets up a whole amazing array of committees working on community remembrance and how does that play out today. So it is both a history project and what happens now and in the future. So I was on the research committee researching two documented lynchings in Alexandria in the 1890s. And so I think that I I come to this with a realistic sense of the work it takes and the necessity of really like breaking it down into small enough pieces that one is not just working from, well, I kind of remember that I heard that this person, that, you know, like the Little family, some of the founders were blah, 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 blah. But the notion of documenting all the players in what is going on. And a lot of that happens through our own archives, our own parish records. So this is an opportunity to kind of read primary sources that nobody has read probably in a while. And it is kind of fun, like little spidery handwriting, and mimeographs. And I think a lot of it will be really interesting to see what's the background and the early gentrification of the 1890s that informs what some of the founders are doing, and working our way up through history. And it's kind of cool, like a little bit that I was working on had to do with the 1950s and 60s when it turned out like a lot of the original families were moving away, but they went all in on Adams Morgan and were paying the salary of like a radical young priest who can talk to the youth of America, and got hauled before a congressional committee for being possibly a communist. I mean, there's drama and early consideration of reparations in the 60s in vestry. You play the vestry minutes and you're like, you guys even know that word? So it's a really intriguing and interesting project. And I think some of it will involve some real hands-on stuff that you'll do alone and safely, of going through the parish records, rehousing them, inventorying them, stuff where you can like really like use that part of your brain, not the part that is, you know, like dealing with people. And then there's also research, and we have access to a lot of really wonderful databases via online from the DC Public Library to do newspaper research on like who is George Little or whoever. So there's a lot of really cool stuff to go into this, and we will be working in a broader canvas than race and St. Margaret's, because we don't really know where race and St. Margaret's is going to pop up. So we will be covering a slightly broader ground, and as we find that those hunks of gold in there, then we can follow those seams to mine them for all they're worth. So if you're interested, by all means, drop me a line. I think it will be very fun because there will be a lot of different kinds of opportunities to do stuff. And I found working on the Community Remembrance Project that it was extremely satisfying to feel like I was adding to the sum total of knowledge in the world. Information and history that has been lost even only 100 years ago is able to be found. And that's really fun. So come along, join me. But, you know, do it by sending me an email.
Questions for Farah? We may not be able to answer them, but it'll be good to catalog your questions.
Would you make a solicitation to the parish as a whole for working on this? I mean, beyond just this little group of 14?
Yeah, sure. Of course. Absolutely.
I included one in a tiny way in my blog, and I got one response to that, which wasn't Farah. So the committee is currently made up of 2 people. But I think once I guess I've asked Farah to think about some bones of a structure, so that more than a line in the rector's blog could be conveyed in terms of what the intent is, what kind of help we need, and what the timeline is, which is kind of uncertain right now because it really could take an entire calendar year beginning now to do this work, which might be slow and occur in fits and starts and stops. But yes, noting the need to make sure that the announcement is more widely shared.
Just and if everybody hasn't noticed it already, there's a whole conversation happening about Dr. Yolanda Pierce. And I guess that Julie just announced that there's an event happening with her tomorrow, and Maya had added something. I've been cutting and pasting as you write things. So I used to belong to a Catholic church in Minneapolis that did their history, St. Joan of Arc, which is kind of a radical feminist history, but also they looked at their own history and their complicity history with racism. I wasn't there when they did that, but I know that was part of the backdrop of what was happening a few years ago. So if that's, you may know others who have done it, but I just thought that might be helpful if you wanted to talk to somebody there about what they did or how they approached it. You clearly don't need that, but I'm just offering. And I'm interested in supporting, but I have two challenges. One is I don't live nearby the church, so coming to the church is not easy. And the other is I have dyslexia, and it's really hard for me to read and organize documents, but I can do research. So where I can help, like with those impediments, I would be interested.
Great, good to know. No spidery handwriting for you, but other stuff.
I'm just very, very slow, and it could take me hours.
Maybe this is getting ahead of us a little bit, but I mean, when I think of our history, the first sort of infamous thing or famous thing that comes to mind is Woodrow Wilson and his marriage there. And we all know he has a checkered legacy when it comes to segregation and racial issues and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's just, I wanted to share that just because it popped in my head. I don't know where the Woodrow Wilson fans of the world are in terms of being honest about that legacy these days, but it's something to sort of think about as the work goes forward.
And yes, Edith's, of course, nephew is a member of the parish. So yeah, I'm sure that that there are mixed feelings out there. I didn't know that the wedding took place at St. Margaret's. To Edith, it did.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but they decamped quickly to a Presbyterian church.
Ah.
But St. Margaret's did get the press, so that's what's important, right?
Well, it's an hour in, but anyone have any closing thoughts, questions, or complaints? I'm excited about the possibilities. I'm very grateful that you showed up tonight to lend your support and well, and especially your thoughts about how to proceed with this. It sounds like a really great opportunity. Diana and I will get organized and confer with Ron, of course, and we'll take it from there. But I'm very excited about the direction that this is headed. I think it's going to be a very meaningful and in some cases, I hope, life-changing journey for us all. Shall we end with prayer? May God be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving Spirit may so move every human heart, and especially the hearts of the people of St. Margaret's, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatreds cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace, through Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you
Thanks
soon.
a bunch. Good night.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.